All right, I think we're ready to start. I'm going to start by going through a few housekeeping items. First of all, we want to encourage all of you to ask questions throughout the webinar. To do this, there's a question box on the control panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. Please type the questions as soon as you have them, and as we will be stopping throughout the webinar to answer them depending on the section that we're at. Now remember, the more you ask, the more you're going to get out of this webinar. So we really encourage you to try and ask questions. Now, if time permits, we'll leave about 20 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer all of your remaining questions. As far as presentations or handouts, there is a little panel by the questions in the GoToWebinar panel where you can also download the PDF of the presentation. Now, normally I like to make the demos interactive, so I encourage all of you to write topics of what you would like to see. Since today's topics are based around two different types of methodologies that usually generate lots of disagreement, we would like to get as many questions from you to see if we can tailor the webinar towards answering these topics. While we wait for the last couple of people to join, I'm going to do a quick introduction about myself. My name is Federico Pena. I'm the president and founder of IT-ROI Solutions. And I've been working in the ITBM, it used to be called, I guess, ITSM, the service management, but now it's geared more towards the business management space. And really I've been focused around the PPM space, the project management, service management, and configuration management for the last 20 years as a consultant. The last few years, I've dedicated my career to trying to make IT simpler by allowing users to utilize the tools that they're familiar with. Today, we're going to focus on a different concept in IT. This concept is to try to do things with what we have and show the audience why less is more, or really how you can do more with less. I think we can go ahead and start. So the topics today, we're going to do a brief introduction about IT-ROI Solutions. Then we're going to talk about what is Agile. And when I say what is Agile, we're really just going to talk about a few of the differences between Agile and traditional or waterfall. And the reason is, I think that that's one of the biggest topics around project management. So we're going to try and cover how we can utilize both methodologies inside of one project. And then, we're going to talk about the myths of why our projects aren't agile or mixing waterfall and agile in the same projects. And then we're going to try and talk about releasing your PMO's agile potential through SharePoint, right? So how do you manage information from multiple different systems in one location or one platform? Then we're going to do a quick demo displaying, and the demo is actually going to be going through a real live use case from a specific client. And then we're going to go through a question and answer session. So don't forget, questions are critical, people. If you want us to cover a specific topic, make sure that you ask questions. So I'm going to start off about IT-ROI Solutions, or about us, right? Our areas of expertise. Initially, obviously, we've been focused around the CA PPM or the PPM space for since 2009. So we're an upstart enterprise integration consulting firm. And our mission was to deliver consulting services. But as the years went, our focus really changed from providing services to figuring out how we could minimize the services that we provided to clients. And we did this by trying to automate the implementation process. And I'm not necessarily talking about the initial configuration. We're really talking about, how to tie different components of tool sets into your PPM. So we noticed that one of the biggest costs that organizations were encountering at the time were the cost of integrations. So we started our software organization by building what we call the IB, or the integration bridge. So this was a tool designed to automate building of integrations, basically by automating the business rules of an ETL. Today, one of the main focuses of this webinar is going to be why it is not necessary to integrate. So we're going to talk a lot about not needing to integrate, right? So being able to display data without, and providing the right views to the right people without the need of integrating. And since part of our vision is to make integrations easier and more efficient, right, there's a lot of cases where integrating is not necessary. And we want to help customers achieve common goals and give them the necessary flexibility that they require without the technical overhead required with some integrations. So as we all know, Agile is growing, and I think one of the most difficult decisions we face as project managers is, how do we execute this project? Or in short, what type of methodology do we need to implement? This is a topic that generates lots of discussion and sometimes even some serious heated debate, right? I always say that the methodology is just a way of thinking or a way to organize the task or work at hand, right? And there's really two basic methodologies that we're going to be discussing inside of this webinar, and they are, one is waterfall and the second is agile, right? Now, when I first started in the project management space around 18 years ago, agile was never even considered to be an effective methodology. As a matter of fact, I hardly ever even heard of, Scrum Masters or anything. Everything was more, PMI, PMBOK, right? And now it seems to be the dominating methodology, right? The main difference is that waterfall is a linear approach where things happen in a sequence, right? And agile is an iterative approach, meaning a deliverable is produced and accepted incrementally around short iterations, right? Both methodologies have major benefits and they have major drawbacks, right? The hardest question is to figure out the type of project, right? Because why? For one, you need to know your project team, your resource availability, and the expertise that one has to figure out which is the best approach to use. For example, generally, the traditional or waterfall approach is very linear and rigid, right? Generally, one stage cannot begin before the previous stage completes. Therefore, it's not very flexible for change. Agile, on the other hand, because there's short iterations and customer has early opportunities to see the work being delivered and make decisions on changes throughout the project, this allows change to be very flexible and not quite as expensive. But with this being said, because waterfall is more rigid or structured, then it is easier to track, easier to control the cost, which could not be said about agile. This is what really leads most clients to want to do a mixed approach, meaning they want the flexibility of agile with the tracking of waterfall. And most of the integrations that we've done in the past are really based around that, right? How do we track effort, or how do we track costs, or how do we make our executives happy by telling them the actual value that this project is going to cost, or the actual date that this project is going to finish, which is somewhat complicated to do within the agile format. So let me ask everyone here, who uses an agile tool for their software development, but needs to break the agile methodologies by tracking time, cost, and other PM overhead? I think that's the reason most of you are here on this webinar, is to get the answer to the question we're all looking for. How can we blend these products to get the best of both worlds? I know most people here are thinking, well, let's integrate. So let's talk about what it is that we're trying to accomplish. We already discussed the waterfall challenges and some of the benefits. The challenges are easy. Change is expensive. Sometimes quality suffers because we might run out of budget during the testing phase, and therefore we can't provide an accurate QA process, right? But the benefits are very clear for the business, right? First is planning, right? Planning for waterfall projects is very clear and concise. Requirements are usually hashed out, understood very clearly prior to development, and the phases can be measured in elements of time or money, right? The team, right? There's no clear need for all the project team members to have full availability to the project at the same time, therefore allowing more precise skill set to be selected. So for example, because I might need somebody 10% or 20% of the time, well, I can get the exact skill set that I may require for that project for a short period of time. Now, estimating, because of clear requirements and planning, estimating costs is more accurate, right? And the fourth is the customer, right? There is low customer involvement necessary, usually just requirements, milestones, and sign-offs, right? Now, this is what CA-PPM is all about, right? Tracking costs, not only at the project level, but program level, portfolio level, right? So if you look at most agile tool sets, they're not really geared towards tracking allocations, costs, availability, or even how to build portfolios, right? They're geared to track what needs to be done and what has been done. But let's face it, at the end of the day, the C-level executives need to turn that into money, right? So when it comes to agile, right, planning is done in short iterations, usually in 2 weeks, right? So when it comes to providing an end date of the complete project, it's very difficult, right? The team, right, usually the team is assigned to the project 100% of the time, and the same team shares different skill sets to provide all of the skill sets necessary to be able to complete the tasks, right? And estimating isn't usually done in hours or money. It's usually done in some type of weighted fashion, right? As far as, percentages of what the whole project could be, right? And the customer requires to be involved inside of the project all the time, okay? So there's much more customer interaction involvement necessary. So this allows people, right, to do different things. First of all, do they provide executive visibility, right? One of the myths about Agile is that teams should be allowed to make business decisions instead of waiting for executives or stakeholders for approval. The misconception is that teams sometimes think that because they make business decisions, they do not need to provide executive status reporting. And most Agile teams will agree that although they do not provide status report, because the methodology of Agile is not really a format that executives are comfortable with, because that would make it inconsistent with Agile practices. For example, there are lots of projects that I've been on where one of the requirements is that the team provide metrics on % complete. This forces the Agile team to maintain a separate task plan to enable that kind of reporting. Usually, in Agile is, backlog, in progress, complete, right? There is no 30%, 50%. Although, I've never really liked the % complete, because a lot of times, you're on a project where they said, it's 80% complete. But generally, I usually ask the team, does that mean that there's 20% less left? Because usually it's the other way around. Just because it's 80% complete, it means usually that only 20% of the work is done and 80% is remaining, right? So one could say that the problem is not the Agile methodology that needs to change, but the corporate executive culture that needs to understand how to interpret status reports from an Agile team, instead of imposing waterfall reporting requirements, which are inconsistent with Agile methodologies. Defining a finish date. Although Agile teams shy away from providing guaranteed delivery dates, given the cone of uncertainty around the project, it's a fallacy that an Agile project can't provide a scheduled finish date. If an executive hears that an agile team is only prepared to give an estimated delivery date for the next couple of iterations, it should raise a warning flag about the team's capability to build credible release plans. It's true that agile teams use just-in-time estimation for iterations and focus on delivering business value incrementally. However, release and roadmap planning is used for longer range estimates. The use of epics, for example, or large stories and themes, groups of stories, can be used to estimate work that still requires detailed scoping. To be able to estimate with some degree of reliability, an agile team will need to have normalization around the size of stories and understand their velocity, right? Story points delivered in an iteration. And three, agile and traditional PMs are not compatible. It's true that agile practices have fundamental differences with traditional project management practices. For example, the planning and executing process groups in the PMI's PMBOK. However, it's untrue that the two types of practices can't be combined to create a powerful project management framework. For instance, agile practices are usually silent on project intake or project initiation processes and traditional practices for project costs. Communications and risk management are often more mature than the corresponding practices in agile. Experienced project managers can add practices from the PMBOK or similar methodologies to support agile projects without disrupting culture and work practices of an agile team. So as we covered in the previous slide, really there are two main project management methodologies, both with different flavors. And in short, one is good for the team, the other is good for reporting to management. And the dilemma really boils down around how do we make everyone happy? This is really where most PMOs have a hard time on how to do this without doing twice the work. And we're increasingly motivated to integrate Agile with PPM. Then the real question arises, and that is, why do you need to integrate? We've done tons of PPM to Agile integrations, and the most common reason is for tracking time. There's always a need from finance to find out what the cost was for a particular project. Of course, finance being one of the most powerful departments in an organization, they can usually enforce their needs onto the staff. But this still leaves the PMO in the blind when it comes to how timelines are coming along, as well as it leaves the Agile PM in the blind to what business has available for resources and other project constraints. The only way to accomplish this would be to integrate everything from both tools all the time, right? Task data, status data from the Agile team to the PPM system, and bring all the allocations and availability from the PPM system to the Agile system. This, of course, seems like a huge amount of data duplication and a lot of unnecessary work. Now, recently, while working with a client that basically required 60% of the data from both systems in one, we came to a conclusion that resolved not only the PMO's need, as well as the Agile team's need, as well as finance's need, without the need to actually integrate. Generally speaking, integrations is just a mass duplication of data structures and data to provide a holistic view of data in one place. And the solution that was implemented was just to be able to view without the integration. So we used a common platform that a high percentages of organizations already own. And that's really the basis of this webinar, right? We want to show you how you can utilize structures that you already own to get through and past your current pain points. So I'm just going to put a couple of notes here, on things that you want to think about, right? How many projects do you think currently need Agile methodologies, right? So out of all the projects that you do, how many could you do in an Agile format, right? how should you visualize Agile in the project information? And how should the communication be to ensure that there's project governance, right? At the end of the day, it's how do you govern your Agile team to be able to report to your executives on that time and data? So integrating an Agile project methodology into a PPM framework is no different than integrating a more traditional project methodology with 4 exceptions. 1, Agile teams work best when executives and project managers don't stifle the Agile process. Imposing unnecessary stakeholder reviews, checkpoints, and data capture requirements on an Agile project will reduce the effectiveness of the team. Of course, if major decisions need to be made with an executive input or Agile project has dependencies on other projects, stakeholder meetings will be necessary. But these should be the exception, not the rule. Number 2, Agile projects measure progress in story points, complete or business value delivered. This is a fundamentally different way of tracking progress than using a task plan and measuring task hour completion. In addition, a project manager assigns tasks to owners in a traditional project, whereas Agile teams are often self-organizing. So tasks may be reassigned at any time by the team to ensure project delivery is on track. This difference requires that metrics for project health and percentage complete are tracked differently from projects based on task hours. Number 3, given the task assignments within an Agile team are dynamic, it is unwise to assign a resource part-time to an Agile team, as this breaks the self-organizing model. Instead, it's better to treat Agile teams as a unit and assign resources to them full-time, with the exception of resources such as technical architects or DBAs that are typically spread across multiple projects. And finally, regular reviews of Agile projects are more focused on working software rather than predetermined milestones or delivering project documentation. Reviews should be tailored to the type of projects to ensure they're valuable to the team. All right. So here we're going to talk about a couple of different tools. We're going to talk about Jira, and the reason we're going to talk about Jira is because Jira is the most popular Agile management tool. We're going to talk about SharePoint because SharePoint is a very common document management tool for organizations, and we're going to talk about CA/PPM because I believe everyone that's on this call is a CA/PPM user. Right, so SharePoint was selected because it is the default document management tool for the organization. They were already creating sites, libraries, folders for each of their projects to maintain their project artifacts within one location. So this is common, right? Where you might have, a document repository tool, you might have an Agile tool, and you might have a PPM tool, right? So within the solution that I'm about to demo, you'll see how in this particular client's case, we utilize CA/PPM for governance, resource management, and the deployment of business strategy. And we use Jira for their backlog management, sprints, and the flexibility of story points. But at the end of the day, we needed to provide reporting to high-level management. So really, it's Agile in one place, okay? So how did we accomplish Agile in one place, right? Once the differences with Agile projects are understood, developing a PPM framework with standard metrics that apply to both Agile and traditional projects is important. The 5 common metrics that enable executives to get visibility into project status, regardless of the delivery method, are outlined below. Right? Scheduled finish date, planned finish date is the estimate made at the inception of the project for the planned delivery date, whereas scheduled finish date is the estimate of a project finish date at any given point in time on the current data. For traditional projects, this is based on the task plan and a critical path for the project. For an agile project, it is based on the release plan. Given a cone of uncertainty exists regardless of project methodology. The accuracy of scheduled finish dates should be comparable for both traditional and agile. Now, comparing scheduled finish date to planned finish date will give an indication of the team's availability to estimate delivery dates accurately. Percent complete. Percent complete provides an indication of project progress. But percent complete for traditional project is calculating by summing the hours for completed tasks and dividing them by the total task hours for a project or assigned hours. In contrast, an agile project progress is measured by story points delivered. Percentage complete is calculated by story points accepted divided by total story points of a project. And scope changes. So percentage complete gives an indication of progress, but does not show if the scope is changing on a project. For traditional projects, this is typically represented by the number of change requests. For an agile project, it's typically measured by the change in the total story points over time. So actual cost versus budget. Both traditional and agile projects have capital and operational expenses that are tracked. Actual cost versus budget cost should be reported. Regardless of project methodology, however, it is not appropriate to ask an agile team to track time at a task level to calculate resource costs. Instead, resources should be dedicated to an agile team and costs calculated accordingly. Then we have project health. Project health is a summary metric that indicates if a project is on track, needs attention, or is in trouble. This metric varies by organization and is calculated using conditional logic based on 4 metrics above, as well as all other data such as outstanding issues. One of the simplest ways to calculate project health is to compare actual percentage complete with the expected percentage complete based on the start date and the scheduled finish date. A project health status of needs attention or in trouble is often triggered when projects are not delivering business value. There's significant scope changes, costs exceed budget, or there are major unresolved issues in the project. So in this case here, what we're trying to show is how we can utilize the reporting aspects of inside of SharePoint to display both PPM data and JIRA data. So to get live reports from both tool sets and displayed into one component. So I'm going to get into a demo. We're going to cover, the demo is built on a technology called the EC-Boss, which is basically a SharePoint enterprise content bridge. And this really is going to show how we can display different data from different tool sets in one screen and be able to manage different teams depending on your management style. So C-level executives can get the data that they need, project managers can get the data that they need, finance team can get the data that they need, as well as the end users or developers can get the data that they need. Now remember, the main goal of IT is to simplify data transfer between systems and end users to allow them to make accurate decisions across the work spectrum. Meaning managers or executives and developers should all be able to have a common location where they can interact with each other to be able to get their tasks complete without having a high cost to their IT departments. Now I'm going to open up for questions first or ideas. And and I'm going to get into the demo. So at the moment, I don't currently have any demos, any questions. So what I'm going to start off with is I'm going to show us a few different screens within inside of project management tool sets. In this case here, I have CA/PPM. We've got a project called My Agile Project. In this case here, we are going to be managing part of the team, part of the allocations through CA/PPM. We're going to be managing risks through CA/PPM. Then I'm going to cover a component of Jira, okay? So we're going to be able to manage our projects or our backlog directly from Jira. And then we're going to show a couple of different mixed views inside of SharePoint. So how we can show that all of that data from within inside of SharePoint, okay? And then how we can interact as end users with inside of the two different tool sets. And then last but not least, we're going to cover how we can visualize all of this data and roll it up as a portfolio view, okay? So in this case here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by actually assigning a person to this workstation purchase. So now you can see here, for example, I have my tasks. So all of the tasks that are assigned to me at this moment actually come from this one project. So what I want to do is I want to go to my stuff, right? But whenever I assign myself, so I'm going to assign myself to this, and I'm going to look for myself. So I'm going to assign myself to this task, okay? Now, when I assign myself to this task, and I come back to my Agile project, to my stuff, and I refresh the screen, I'm going to be able to visualize that I am now have new task available for me. So here, you can see that I have this new task available for me, right? So this gives me the ability to be able to map data from CA/PPM or from Jira in the same list, okay? So the second view that I can do from within inside of here is, so let's say I need to make a comment. But the comment that I need to make for within inside of this project is something that finance actually needs to visualize. And generally, finance doesn't really have access to Jira. So I need to have them or give them access to visualize discussions directly from within inside of SharePoint. So SharePoint is going to be the common platform. Why is it the common platform? Because that's the company standard for their intranet. So let's say this workstation, right? So I add the comment directly inside of the task, okay? But really, like I said, like I mentioned before, this is very difficult for somebody inside of finance to be able to visualize this. So they need to be able to visualize this data directly inside of SharePoint. So we're going to come to my project here, and within inside of this project, because we're utilizing SharePoint for collaboration. So here we can see that there's no discussion here, but if I refresh the screen, and I come down here, I can see that, for the task workstation purchase, right, that same comment that was delivered within inside of Jira is entered through here. So now I could have somebody from finance responding to this and adding information to this particular task, right? So this provides a back and forth. So the end users you don't need to give people access to your Agile products such as Jira. You don't need to give people access to your CA/PPM data, or you don't need to be able to manage your documents inside of either of the two tools. really we're using a common platform to be able to display that data in two different locations, right? And this really gives you the best of both worlds. So in this case here, right, I've got a dashboard, and in this dashboard on the left-hand side, I've got my CA PPM data, and on the right-hand side, I've got my JIRA data, right? So here, I can visualize, everything that's important for governance, right, in one view, right? And I can also come and take a look at everything that's important within inside of JIRA, right, in one view. Now, let's say I came and you said, well, I need to be able to give somebody within inside of SharePoint access to the risks, right? And this is the person that is managing their stuff as a developer within inside of JIRA, and they need to create a new risk. Well, this now picks the correct platform, right? So in this case, it's going to be CA PPM. It dynamically builds a form in in SharePoint from the CA PPM data. So here we're going to call this. All right, and here now we have the two risks, and we have a common view, right? Even though your project manager from within inside of CA PPM might want to go through and visualize this data through CA PPM, they have a common platform where they can visualize it. Or in another case, somebody might say, well, you know what? We need to add something or add a comment or a particular task to JIRA. Well, here I can come and I can see that I have sprint 1, and I can grab this task and I can slide it across from one stage to another within inside of my Agile toolset. Now this, like I said, gives me the ability to be able to visualize and maintain the data on both tool sets, so I can provide accurate reporting on the data that's important to me. So I'm going to stop here for a couple of minutes, and I'm going to open the floor for questions to see if anyone has any questions. Normally I would, okay, so here I've got the first question. Does this work with CA PPM on demand? Yeah, so generally the advantage of being able to utilize SharePoint contains a push-pull methodology that utilizes web services. And because web services are being utilized, then yes, absolutely, cloud platforms are absolutely supported. So this is a little bit different technology than something like BCS, which is SharePoint's business connectivity services. This basically goes through either a REST or a SOAP API call to be able to extract the data and display it within inside of the tool set. Now, the same logic applies for, if there is a need to push data back into the originating tool set, it also utilizes the REST API. Now, because the logic is going to reside within inside of SharePoint, then SharePoint, whether it's on-premise or on 365, can communicate to the cloud platform via HTTPS or the secure socket layer that it uses for the API. Now, I don't see any other questions coming in. Like I said, normally I give people 20 minutes or so for questions and answers at the end of the webinar. But it seems like, if there's no additional questions that need to be answered at the moment, one of the things I can do is Obviously, we're going to provide a replay of this webinar for people, as well as don't forget you can download the PowerPoint directly from here, or you can send us an email to find out if you got any additional questions. Other than that, I want to thank everybody for attending, and I appreciate your time.